16 years ago, a shocking incident happened to a child named Soo-hyun. While Soo-hyun was living in an orphanage, an attempted murder was carried out against him. Although Soo-hyun narrowly escaped death, he could not fully remember what had happened. At the time of the incident, Soo-hyun was only a 10-year-old child. The person who saved him from the brink of death was a professional assassin named Pavo. From that day on, Soo-hyun began growing up in Pavo's house. Pavo started teaching him everything he knew, day and night. To become an assassin like Pavo, there were 3 unbreakable rules that had to be followed. 1. Under no circumstances should the client's identity ever be revealed. 2. The person to be eliminated must not be allowed to speak a single word before being killed. 3. No eyewitness should ever be left alive under any circumstances. However, on this particular day, a different kind of order was given. In front of him was a puppy. Soo-hyun was ordered to kill the dog. No matter how hard he tried to convince himself, he could not pull the trigger and shoot the innocent animal. After watching his hesitation for a long time, Pavo angrily grabbed the gun and aimed it at the dog. At that moment, Soo-hyun grabbed Pavo's hand and tried to save the dog. Pavo immediately turned the gun toward Soo-hyun. A professional assassin, he believed, must never have emotions for anything. Extremely disappointed, Pavo tied Soo-hyun to a tree and left him there. In that condition, Soo-hyun had to protect himself from wild animals. The next morning, Soo-hyun found himself free on the ground. It was the same dog he had saved earlier that had bitten through the rope with its teeth and freed him. No one had ever shown Soo-hyun kindness before. In his life, the only act of kindness he had ever experienced came from that dog. 17 years passed in this manner. By now, Soo-hyun had grown into one of the most dangerous assassins. On the other hand, his trainer and guardian, Pavo, had developed Alzheimer's disease due to old age. Because his life had been filled with hatred and suspicion, one day he suddenly forgot Soo-hyun and attempted to kill him with his gun. Soo-hyun was forced to defend himself. However, since he could not bring himself to kill his trainer, he disarmed him as best he could and tried to escape. Despite this, Pavo's combat skills were still sharp. He managed to catch Soo-hyun, but fortunately, since he did not strike a vital spot, he only knocked him unconscious. While sitting on a chair and bandaging his wounds, Soo-hyun made a major decision. From that moment on, he would stop taking lives. Even though he knew Pavo would strongly oppose this, he was determined. He planned to tell Pavo about his decision once he woke up. However, when Pavo regained consciousness, he told Soo-hyun that there was an extremely urgent and critical mission. Soo-hyun then asked another question. Since Pavo was aging, he requested that the responsibility be handed over to him. Pavo, however, never tolerated negotiations when it came to power and authority, nor did he accept his own aging. The next day, Pavo set out alone on the mission, carrying only his sniper rifle. He lay hidden in a concealed position and waited until his target was in sight. As he was about to pull the trigger, his finger began to tremble, and he lost the courage to shoot. Missing the target was not an option. He lifted his finger and tried to calm himself, but when nothing changed, he decided to go to the house and eliminate the target by hand. Slowly, he approached, taking down the guards as if it were child's play. Just before reaching his target, he was spotted in the corridor by the man's son, whose name was Kareem. Kareem immediately realized that Pavo was an assassin. Pavo could have defeated Kareem easily, but when more guards arrived after hearing the noise, the situation became difficult. Kareem stabbed him in the stomach with a dagger. It was as if Soo-hyun had known this would happen. Kareem quickly grabbed Pavo, opened the door, and escaped. Soo-hyun, however, did not follow him. Instead, he crawled through an air vent on the ceiling and entered their main target's office. As soon as the target realized someone had reached him, he gave a brief order for all his hired men to be summoned. Hearing the call, all of them headed toward their leader's office. That was when Soo-hyun found Pavo severely injured and bleeding heavily, with no strength left to escape. Soo-hyun knew that if he tried to carry him out, the chances of being killed were extremely high. Not wanting to become a burden to Soo-hyun, Pavo decided to end his own life. At the same time, when the hired men entered their leader's office, everything was eerily quiet. It did not take long before they discovered the gift Soo-hyun had left for them. Outside, although Pavel had completely lost hope, Soo-hyun refused to let him die. He carried him back home. However, Pavel continued to refuse all medical treatment. As his memory loss worsened and he became increasingly weak, the once feared assassin, now unable to recognize even his own limits, ultimately chose death over living in helplessness. But that was not all. Pavel repeatedly begged Soo-hyun for forgiveness, for dragging him into this life, for turning him into an assassin, for placing a gun in a child's hands. He pleaded desperately for Soo-hyun to forgive him. Finally, he advised Soo-hyun to forget everything he had taught him, and with that, his life came to an end. After this incident, Soo-hyun followed Pavo's final advice. He completely abandoned the dangerous life and decided to start anew. That same evening, a photo was sent to Soo-hyun's phone. The image shocked him deeply. It was identical to the photo he had carried in his pocket since childhood. He immediately called the number that had sent the photo. The instructions were clear. A wealthy woman wanted Soo-hyun to kill 6 people. The payment, however, would not be money. Instead, for every person he killed, she would give him 1 clue about his past life and about his parents. Soo-hyun agreed without hesitation. As soon as his first target was assigned, he headed to the location. The man was standing at the edge of a cliff, hunting. Just as the man rested his hand on the trigger, Soo-hyun appeared out of nowhere, strangled him with a rope, and threw him off the cliff. After confirming that the man was dead, Soo-hyun took a photograph as proof and sent it. Almost immediately, he received the first clue, a photograph of a mother and her child. This was a major key to unraveling Soo-hyun's childhood story. The next morning, the police were busy examining the corpse. Because the victim was a major investor, the case drew significant attention. A team of investigators was assigned, led by Chief Detective Hyun-jin. As she examined the body, she realized that the man had not died from falling off the cliff. The terror frozen on his face helped her confirm that it was a murder. After sending the body for further examination, she began heading back to her office. Along the way, the road was blocked by an injured deer lying across it, forcing her to stop. Soo-hyun was standing beside the injured animal. When she got out of her car, she carefully immobilized the deer and made arrangements for it to be taken to a veterinary clinic. As she did this, Soo-hyun watched her quietly. He noticed that she had used her scarf to tie the deer's mouth, which he did not like. He returned the scarf to her, lifted the deer into his car, thanked Hyun-jin for her cooperation, and promised to wash and return the scarf since it had gotten dirty. He then gave her his business card and they parted ways. That evening, Soo-hyun went to a restaurant to eat. At that time, the restaurant owner was beating his wife. Soo-hyun entered and stopped him. Even after repeatedly warning the owner to leave the restaurant, the man refused. Instead, Soo-hyun turned to the woman and calmly asked her to prepare his meal. Enraged, the owner approached him, but after locking eyes with Soo-hyun and seeing his cold, unwavering stare, he chose to retreat. After finishing his meal, Soo-hyun returned to his office. He now worked at a veterinary clinic owned by a young woman named Sol-ji. Although she was still a high school student, the clinic belonged to her. When Solji noticed a woman's scarf inside the office, she asked Soo-hyun who it belonged to. When he told her it was from a woman he had met on the road, jealousy immediately appeared on Solji's face. She asked him to explain more clearly who the woman was, but Soo-hyun ignored her question and walked past it. At the same time, the autopsy report arrived at the police station. The doctor who conducted the examination informed Detective Hyun-jin that there was a needle mark on the victim's neck and that the cause of death was poisoning. However, the most surprising discovery was something else. Traces of narcotics were found on the syringe used. This meant the syringe was not new. It did not take long to identify its owner. The syringe belonged to the restaurant owner who had earlier been beating his wife. He was taken into custody that same day and placed in an interrogation room. Just as expected, when his addiction took over, he pulled out the syringe and tried to inject himself. The officers immediately seized it from him. This provided sufficient evidence to label him as the killer. Even so, Jin was not convinced. Something about the case felt wrong. The man was mentally unstable due to drug abuse, whereas the murder showed signs of being carried out by someone calm, precise, and highly intelligent. She became convinced that the real killer was using him as a scapegoat. However, her superiors refused to allow the investigation to continue. Because the victim was a powerful investor, there was intense pressure from high-ranking officials to close the case quickly. Accepting the evidence against the restaurant owner, they decided to officially close the case. Realizing she could not change the decision, Jin let it go. That night, lost in thought as she drove home, she suddenly hit a cat on the road. Unsure what to do, she remembered the business card Soo-hyun had given her. She picked up the injured cat and went to the clinic. Soo-hyun immediately began changing into surgical clothing. When the cat's condition worsened rapidly, he realized he could not save it alone. After great effort, the two of them managed to save the cat's life. Soo-hyun and the detective seemed to grow closer. But after some time, Hyun-jin noticed an anesthetic placed on the table. It was the same chemical found on the victim's body. She immediately asked Soo-hyun what he used it for. Calmly, he explained that he used it to painlessly euthanize animals that were suffering and beyond recovery. Jin listened silently, suspiciously. At that moment, Solji entered the room, interrupting their conversation. After Hyun-jin left, Soo-hyun began destroying information and cleaning traces. He realized that Hyun-jin would not let this go easily. Just as he expected, the next morning she came back and began investigating the room one floor above the clinic. Solji guided her closely. Jin's beauty only intensified Solji's jealousy. Matters worsened when Jin asked to rent a room in the building. Solji strongly refused and gave every excuse she could think of, but it was not enough. In the end, despite her reluctance, she agreed to rent it. The very next day, Hyun-jin moved in with all her belongings. Solji tried as much as possible to prevent Soo-hyun and Hyun-jin from spending time together. The first thing she did after renting out the room was lock the elevator. When Hyun-jin saw that the elevator which had worked the previous day was now locked, she immediately asked why. Solji explained that the elevator was for owners only. Jin said nothing and continued on her way. Later that day, something unexpected happened to Solji. A group of young men in a car suddenly surrounded her. Another man stepped out of the car, and the moment she saw his face, she recognized him. It was her uncle. Because her grandfather had left all his wealth to her, Solji was no longer family to him, but an enemy. He hoped to force her, through violence and intimidation, to transfer the inheritance to him. At that moment, Soo-hyun arrived at the scene and noticed the commotion. As he approached, Jin suddenly appeared and shouted for someone to call the police. She grabbed 2 metal rods and moved toward them. When Solji's uncle saw Hyun-jin holding the rods, he laughed mockingly. But when she threw one rod and shattered his windshield, the laughter turned into rage. The guards immediately surrounded her and attacked. As they pulled her by the hair and beat her, Soo-hyun watched silently. He could not understand why she would risk her life for someone she barely knew. After everything ended and they went their separate ways, Soo-hyun returned home and called his friend Philip. He asked him why someone would risk their life for a stranger. Philip replied that it must be for money. Realizing his friend was no better than himself, Soo-hyun ended the call. That evening, while on his way to work, Soo-hyun met Hyun-jin and they walked back together. As they grew closer, she asked to visit the cat she had saved on her first day at the clinic. He took her inside. After seeing the cat's condition, they sat down. She then added that another reason she had come was to protect Sol-ji. Since inheriting her grandfather's fortune, Sol-ji had been receiving daily threats from her uncle. Hearing this, Soo-hyun told her that he would also protect Sol-ji. This conversation triggered a memory. Years ago, Soo-hyun and Pavel had accepted a new assignment to eliminate Sol-ji's grandfather. They infiltrated the man's house and completed the mission without difficulty. Only later did they realize that Sol-ji had secretly witnessed everything. As usual, Pavel moved to kill her, but Soo-hyun jumped in and stopped him, insisting that she was just a child who understood nothing. Though Pavel was not one to negotiate, he eventually agreed after seeing Soo-hyun's determination. From that day on, Soo-hyun had secretly protected Sol-ji. That same day, Soo-hyun received a message from Karim. Although Karim's father and guards had died in the explosion, Karim had survived and now led his father's mafia organization. Upon receiving the message, Soo-hyun decided to avenge Pavel's death. He called Philip and asked him to locate Karim's address. Once he had it, Soo-hyun went to Karim's house that very night. Meanwhile, Karim's involvement in illegal human trafficking had drawn police attention. Disguised as an electrician, Hyun-jin entered Karim's house to gather evidence. Her plan was to photograph everything related to his crimes and leave. As she searched the house, a small child suddenly opened a door and collapsed. Outside, Hyun-jin's superior, who had been monitoring the situation, argued with her over what to do. At that moment, Karim's guards surrounded her. Karim came out, noticed her, and realized there was a camera hidden in her glasses. He ordered the guards to kill her. Jin fought desperately to save herself, but was physically overpowered. Just as she lost all hope, a bottle flew out of nowhere and struck one of the guards. It was Soo-hyun. The guards immediately turned their attention to him. He took down the guards without difficulty, while the police outside managed to rescue Hyun-jin. When she realized that Karim had been left alone, she chased after him and apprehended him all the way to the top floor. At first, it seemed as though he was about to surrender. However, at an unexpected moment, he fired his gun at her. At that instant, Soo-hyun arrived again and saved her from the bullet. The shot meant for Hyun-jin struck Soo-hyun instead. She immediately aimed her gun at Soo-hyun and demanded to know who he was. Soo-hyun gave no answer. Instead, he grabbed the rope Karim had used to escape, swung down, and disappeared from the scene. The incident deeply shocked Hyun-jin. Although Soo-hyun's escape frustrated her, the fact that he had saved her life left her with troubling questions. Meanwhile, Soo-hyun returned home immediately and began replaying everything that had happened with Hyun-jin. When he reflected on his own actions, how he had jumped in to save her without thinking even once, he was unsettled. He felt the identity of the killer within him slowly beginning to crumble. The emotion growing inside him was new and frightening. Moreover, it conflicted with the rules taught to him by his mentor, Pavel. Determined to act, he sought an excuse to meet Sol-ji and asked her to have Hyun-jin move out of the building. Sol-ji, however, firmly refused. Since Hyun-jin had saved her from her uncle, Sol-ji now considered her a benefactor and made it clear she would never ask her to leave. Elsewhere, Hyun-jin could not stop thinking about the man who had saved her from the criminals. Every second replayed in her mind. She was certain she had seen his eyes somewhere before. As she struggled to remember, Her phone rang and snapped her out of her thoughts. It was a birthday reminder. She had no close friends she could truly call her own, so that evening she bought a cake and decided to spend the time with Soo-hyun. She told him that it was the birthday of the friend she cherished most, even though she had not seen or heard from this friend for the past 20 years, despite searching everywhere. As she spoke about how, since childhood, they used to make paper airplanes on their birthdays, write their wishes on them, and send them off together, telling him how deeply she missed that friend. Soo-hyun's expression began to change. Suddenly, he stood up, gave an unconvincing excuse, and went home. The moment he arrived, he opened a drawer. Inside lay an old paper airplane, carefully preserved. As he looked at the faded handwriting on it, he realized the truth. The childhood friend Hyun-jin longed for was him. Because he remembered nothing of his childhood, Soo-hyun was left confused and uncertain about how to continue his relationship with Hyun-jin. The next morning, as Soo-hyun worked at the clinic as usual, a woman entered and introduced herself as Hyun-jin's mother. She left her business card. What she wanted from Soo-hyun was clear. She asked him to help protect her daughter. She explained that she wanted him to record and report Hyun-jin's daily movements when she left home and when she returned. Soo-hyun's face revealed nothing. After silently observing her for a few seconds, he told her that if he felt it was necessary or if Hyun-jin needed help, he would contact her. He then escorted her to Hyun-jin's room. That evening, when Hyun-jin returned home, she found her apartment beautifully decorated with flowers and new furniture. When she learned that her mother had spoken with Soo-hyun, she went to his office to apologize on her behalf. What caught Soo-hyun's attention, however, was the bruise on her face. As he applied medicine to the wound, he noticed someone standing behind the window. It was Kareem. For the first time, shock appeared clearly on Soo-hyun's face. Solji, the girl he had saved years ago after defying Pavel, was his greatest secret and weakness. No one else knew about her. From that day on, Soo-hyun made excuses to accompany her wherever she went. Even that did not feel sufficient. He gave her a whistle and warned her to blow it immediately if she ever felt in danger. Solji, unaware of the true threat she was facing, did not take the warning seriously. Soo-hyun returned to his office. Minutes later, he heard the sound of the whistle. He ran to Solji's room as fast as he could, only to see that she had slipped and blown it accidentally. Annoyed but relieved, he left. Before he could take 10 steps, he heard the whistle again. He rushed back once more, only to realize that Solji had blown it to call him to eat the breakfast she had prepared. Even though he sternly warned her again to take the situation seriously, she continued blowing the whistle for no reason. After a while, as she went downstairs and approached the door, she suddenly came face to face with Kareem. She tried to escape, repeatedly blowing the whistle as she ran into her bedroom, but it was too late. She fell into Kareem's hands. At that critical moment, Soo-hyun arrived just in time. Saved her and knocked Kareem to the ground with a single punch. He could do whatever he wanted to him, but he must never touch Solji again. Kareem ignored the warning and reached for his gun. He was no match for Soo-hyun's strength. Not wanting Solji to witness a killing, secretly planted a GPS tracker inside his clothes, allowing him to escape. At the same time, Hyun-jin had detained 2 of Kareem's hired men and was interrogating them intensely. She managed to break them. Using the information they provided, she headed toward Kareem's location. Meanwhile, after taking Solji to the hospital, Soo-hyun tracked Kareem's location via GPS, mounted his motorcycle, and raced toward him, determined to end everything once and for all. Kareem, having learned that the police were closing in, attempted to escape by boat. When Soo-hyun reached him by following the GPS signal, Kareem had nowhere left to run except to beg. He pleaded for his life, claiming he knew many secrets about Soo-hyun's past and warning that once he was dead, no one would ever reveal the truth. After Soo-hyun finished, Hyun-jin and her team arrived at the scene. Although she could not bring Karim to justice alive, she succeeded in rescuing many children who had been locked inside containers for illegal trafficking. The next day, after examining Karim's body, the police immediately concluded that he had been killed by a professional assassin. From that day on, Hyun-jin could not stop thinking about the masked man who had saved her. Though he operated outside the law, it was undeniable that he had saved the lives of many children. Her team spent 2 full days conducting investigations to find clues about the killer. However, despite all their efforts, they found nothing that could identify him, and the police officer and the hired assassin gradually grew closer to one another. One day, however, his friend Philip informed him that their employer had prepared a second assignment. What made this assignment different was that the target was a highly influential and powerful politician. The task was to secretly enter the man's office and steal the documents locked inside a safe. If he failed to steal the files, he would be required to kill him. She explained that the clue he was seeking about his past would be found within those documents. The following night, Soo-hyun entered the official's house disguised as a worker. He planted listening devices under the tables, then broke open the safe and examined the documents inside, just as instructed. The documents turned out to be records from a children's orphanage, documenting the children raised there. However, the details did not list names, only numbers. When Soo-hyun reached the last page and saw that the final child was listed as number 88, he was stunned. That number was the same one Hyun-jin had used to refer to him on the paper airplane she sent him during their childhood. He realized that Hyun-jin had been in the same orphanage. But beyond that, there were no further clues, which left him deeply unsettled. Driven by his growing desire to learn more about his childhood, he went to the orphanage that very day. The institution had been closed for many years. The moment he stepped into one particular room, forgotten memories suddenly flooded his mind. He remembered Hyun-jin. She had been his only friend in that orphanage. He recalled the paper airplanes they used to make on their birthdays and everything they had shared. At that moment, he heard a faint sound. It was Hyun-jin. Slowly, she leaned against the wall and began removing stones one by one. This was how they had exchanged gifts as children. Startled by a sudden noise Soo-hyun accidentally made, she looked around quickly but found no one. As Hyun-jin came back from the ruined orphanage, she noticed a motorcycle parked near the clinic. She remembered seeing that same motorcycle near the orphanage hours earlier. Later, when Solji told her the motorcycle belonged to Soo-hyun, Hyun-jin began to suspect his true identity. Determined to investigate further, she invited both Solji and Soo-hyun to her home. In one corner of her house, she had deliberately placed a paper airplane. Just as she expected, Soo-hyun immediately went to it and picked it up. Written on it were the words, "Happy birthday, number 88. As soon as he read it, his eyes turned toward Hyun-jin. She was already watching him. Her suspicion was now almost confirmed. After dinner was served and they sat together, Hyun-jin casually asked Soo-hyun whether he knew how to ride a motorcycle, then asked if he had ever heard of an orphanage called Hansel. At the mention of that name, Philip, who was present, visibly flinched. After Soo-hyun returned home, everything he had experienced in the orphanage came back to him in fragments. At that time, he had no name. He was simply called number 88. The children there were forced to do heavy labor beyond their capacity. Many days, they went to bed without food. Hyun-jin, unable to endure the suffering, had often wished for death. With no one to confide in, she wrote all her wishes down and hid them inside the wall. One day, Soo-hyun discovered her hiding place and read everything she had written. Realizing how desperate her situation was, he decided to approach her and become her closest friend. The next day, when Hyun-jin returned to her hiding place, she found candy beside her notes, along with a letter telling her not to lose hope and promising that he would be her friend. When she read it, she smiled. From that day on, their friendship grew. Years later, Hyun-jin was adopted by a couple who raised her as their own child. Their biological daughter, who had been the same age as Hyun-jin, had recently passed away, and they brought Hyun-jin into their home. She thought she had finally found happiness and freedom, but it was not as she hoped. Her adoptive parents abused and controlled her, and her life was no longer her own. Still, during her darkest moments, she always thought of number 88. Every year, she lit a candle and wrote, "Happy birthday, number 88. After they parted that evening, Hyun-jin went to Soo-hyun. Sitting together, she told him that she would never forget her childhood friend and that he was the only person who had turned her life from despair into something sweet. She stared at him silently. She wanted to hear it from his own mouth that he was number 88. But Soo-hyun refused to confirm it. He knew that he was an assassin and she was a police officer, and he understood that their relationship could never end well. The next day, Soo-hyun went straight to the official's house, the same man from whom he had stolen the documents. He pressed a gun to the man's head and demanded that he reveal everything that had happened at the orphanage. The man insisted repeatedly that he knew nothing. As Soo-hyun's anger boiled and he was moments away from pulling the trigger, he heard a child's laughter. He quickly hid. Watching the official's young daughter run toward her father reminded him of Sol-ji. He abandoned his plan and returned home. As he looked at the neatly arranged weapons he had used over the years, the faces of all the lives he had taken flashed through his mind. He remembered the promise he had made to Pavel before his death, to stop killing and start a new life. The next morning, when Philip woke up, he saw the official who had been ordered killed giving a statement on television. He could not believe his eyes. Philip confronted him immediately and asked why he had not completed the mission. Soo-hyun told him clearly that he had decided to stop taking lives and urged Philip to inform their client that he was done. Philip warned him it would not be easy. Failure to comply could mean their own deaths. He also reminded Soo-hyun that no amount of good deeds could undo the lives he had already taken, and that he would always be a killer. Still, Soo-hyun stood firm. Philip was certain that Hyun-jin was the reason behind this decision. Unable to change his mind, Philip sent a message to their client saying they were withdrawing. The client did not accept this easily. She reminded them that Soo-hyun still had an obligation to complete the assignment and, as encouragement, sent another clue about his past. It was a photograph. The moment Soo-hyun saw it, he went straight to the address written on it. Inside the house, he saw a framed photograph of a young girl. At once, a forgotten memory surged back. He remembered the girl clearly. She had once written 4 names on a piece of paper and asked him to choose one. He had chosen the name Soo-hyun. From that day on, his name had changed. The girl was his foster sister. Her parents had taken Soo-hyun from the orphanage to raise him, though they were not his biological parents. After the girl became seriously ill and passed away, they brought Hyun-jin into their home to replace her. What happened to Soo-hyun afterward, however, he could not remember. Philip suggested that completing the assignment might help him recover the rest of his memories. Soo-hyun, however, remained firm in his decision. While Soo-hyun was holding his phone, he noticed Hyun-jin standing across the asphalt road. As she began to cross, she failed to see a car speeding rapidly toward her. Soo-hyun immediately dropped his phone and rushed toward her. After pushing her out of the car's path and saving her life, he did not say a single word. He left her there and went straight home. At that moment, he fully realized that he had no other option. Within the remaining 3 hours, he would have to eliminate the official. After preparing his weapon, he went online and tracked the places where the official was scheduled to appear. Philip was not pleased. Killing someone hastily, without proper preparation, and in the middle of a crowd was unthinkable. Before leaving, Soo-hyun instructed Philip to find out the true identity of their client by any means necessary, then departed. When Soo-hyun arrived at the location, the official was surrounded by people, delivering a public speech. Although killing him amid such chaos would be extremely difficult, it was the only way to save Hyun-jin and Sol-ji. At the venue, Hyun-jin and additional police officers were deployed, guarding the area cautiously. Soo-hyun fixed his aim and fired a single shot. Panic erupted among the crowd as the official collapsed and died on the stage. Investigators immediately rushed to determine the direction from which the shot had been fired. Only an exceptionally skilled assassin could dare attempt something like this. Soo-hyun blended into the fleeing crowd and tried to escape, but he did not escape Hyun-jin's eyes. She followed him. When they reached a corner, she drew her gun and ordered him not to move. After forcing him to turn toward her, she realized that he was the same man who had once saved her from the mafia. As she cautiously stepped closer and reached out to remove his mask, Soo-hyun knocked the gun from her hand, restrained her wrist with her own handcuffs, and vanished from the area. That day, every police officer assigned to the scene was reprimanded by their superior for failing to apprehend the killer. Hyun-jin was especially criticized, as the suspect had escaped after being within her grasp. She had no response. As a result, the entire police station devoted days to investigating Soo-hyun's identity. Eventually, they managed to reconstruct what his face might look like. When Hyun-jin saw the sketches, she was overwhelmed with shock. She immediately went to the clinic and observed Soo-hyun silently. Although something inside her told her that he was the assassin, she could not bring herself to accept it. She asked Soo-hyun where he had been at the time of the murder. When he told her he had gone to a hospital for treatment, she looked up the hospital's address and went there directly. Upon arrival, she asked the receptionist what time Soo-hyun had been there. Soo-hyun happened to be present and overheard the conversation. Calmly, he explained that he had been assisting a doctor with surgery on an injured animal and then called the doctor, putting the phone on speaker. The doctor confirmed that Soo-hyun had worked with him all day. Convinced by this, Hyun-jin accepted that his alibi was real. Once he was sure her suspicion had subsided, Soo-hyun went to see Philip. Their client had sent another clue, this time an address. When Soo-hyun arrived at the location, more memories surfaced. His foster father's name was Man-suk, a man of great political power and influence. Man-suk and his wife were also the ones who had raised Hyun-jin. Inside the house, Soo-hyun saw that a grand gathering had been prepared. It was there that he finally uncovered the truth. These people had managed to restore the full health of dying officials and politicians by illegally transplanting children's kidneys and hearts. Man-suk had devised this plan over 20 years earlier to evade the law, ensuring children were born secretly outside any official system so their organs could be harvested and sold. The orphanage itself had been established for this very purpose. What Man-suk began 2 decades ago had now become successful, saving many powerful figures and attracting widespread attention. The people gathered there were present to thank him, yet the children themselves had no idea that they were born solely to become organ donors. After quietly listening to everything, Soo-hyun was struck by a devastating realization. Man-suk, the mastermind behind it all, was his biological father. Soo-hyun had been born only to donate his heart to his sick sister. When she died before the surgery, he was sent back to the orphanage. Not long afterward, when Man-suk's plans were exposed by an unknown individual, he ordered all the children to be killed and all evidence destroyed. Even after ordering his own son's death, Soo-hyun managed to hide among the bodies and escape during the chaos. However, his father spotted him on the road and, without hesitation, ran him down with the car. Believing Soo-hyun to be dead, Man-suk dumped him in a ravine and disappeared. All these memories returning at once shattered Soo-hyun completely. Although he knew he could kill his father and his accomplices within minutes, he chose not to. He did not want them to die so easily. Instead, he gathered evidence, took photographs documenting their crimes, and left. At the same time, Hyun-jin returned home late after drinking with her colleagues. On her way, she encountered Soo-hyun standing near the clinic. Drunk, she began speaking freely, revealing everything she felt. She told him she was certain he was her childhood friend, number 88, and went on to describe how her adoptive parents had abused her. In the next scene, the identity of the client who had been feeding Soo-hyun clues is revealed. His name was Professor Go, a close associate of Man-suk. He was the one who invented the technology that allowed children to be grown in laboratories using DNA taken from their parents. Although the professor created it to save lives, Man-suk immediately exploited it for his own hidden agenda. This led to a fierce conflict between them. When the professor threatened to expose him, Man-suk had his entire family murdered that same day. From that moment on, the professor waited patiently for his chance at revenge. That was why he had orchestrated the return of Soo-hyun's memories. After his memories fully returned and he learned the truth about Man-suk's crimes, Soo-hyun was certain he would take revenge without waiting for any orders. Deciding that Man-suk had to die, Soo-hyun disguised himself as a doctor and went to his father's office the next day. On the way, he deliberately collided with him and showed him one of the photos he had taken the night before. He had not come to kill him yet. He wanted to look him in the eyes one last time. Meanwhile, Hyun-jin continued investigating the official who had been assassinated on the stage. After extensive inquiry, she discovered that the man had been the director of the Hansel Children's Orphanage. Continuing her investigation, she uncovered the name of the orphanage's founder. That day, she found an opportunity to ask him to tell her the truth about what had happened. However, he claimed that he knew nothing and told her that if there was anything she wanted to know, she should search for it on the internet. While this was going on, one day, an unidentified individual sent a large number of documents to the police station. The document stated that the orphanage had killed all the children it was supposed to be caring for. Not only that, they also contained detailed information, including the exact location where the children's bodies had been buried. As soon as the police received this information, they went to the site and began digging. Just as described, they discovered countless human bones. The police became certain that the person who had provided this information possessed even more evidence. As a result, they thoroughly reviewed footage from road surveillance cameras showing everyone who had moved around the police station that day. Eventually, they identified the source of the information, Man-suk's secretary. She had sided with the professor and was working to make Man-suk pay for everything he had done. Hyun-jin immediately tried to contact her, but it was already too late. Man-suk's hired men had grown suspicious of the secretary, reached her first, and tied her up inside a room. They turned off her phone and sent a message stating that she was in a meeting. Wanting to convey the seriousness of the situation and speak to her urgently, Hyun-jin sent her a photo she intended to show her upon arriving at the police station. When the secretary saw the photo, she immediately called Man-suk and asked whether he wanted her eliminated. He replied that it would not be necessary. He had another use for her. Realizing that she was working with the professor, he decided to use her to locate him. Meanwhile, the professor quickly learned that his secretary had been captured. After thinking briefly, he decided to use Soo-hyun. He sent Soo-hyun the address where the secretary was being held and informed him that the children were also imprisoned there. Without waiting for further instructions, Soo-hyun rushed to the location. At the same time, Hyun-jin felt that something was wrong. By hacking into the secretary's phone GPS, she also headed to the same place. When she arrived and saw Soo-hyun's car parked there, her heart sank. She drew her gun and called him, asking where he was. Before he could respond, someone attacked her from behind. When he reached her, she had already been badly beaten and was barely conscious. Seeing her in that condition overwhelmed him with a rage he had never known. He brutally defeated all the guards. As he was returning to Hyun-jin, one of the men got back up and lunged toward him. Seeing this, Hyun-jin forced herself to stand and, without hesitation, stepped between them. Soo-hyun froze in shock and terror. Though barely, he managed to get her to the hospital in time and saved her life. When she regained consciousness the next day, Soo-hyun was not by her side. She waited all day thinking he would call or come, but only her colleagues contacted her. Finally, unable to endure it any longer, she decided to leave the hospital and went straight to the clinic. She found Soo-hyun there, working as usual. She angrily told him how upset she was that he had not come to the hospital. He did not respond. Silently, he escorted her home and told her to call him immediately if she needed anything, then left. The next day, both of them returned to their respective jobs. Soo-hyun first went to Man-suk's house and waited from a distance until he came out. As Man-suk got into his car, Soo-hyun called him. When Man-suk answered, Soo-hyun told him that many years had passed since they last faced each other eye to eye. Man-suk looked up and realized that the person watching him from the car in front was Soo-hyun. He showed no visible shock and calmly admitted that his greatest mistake had been failing to confirm Soo-hyun's death before dumping him in the ravine. Enraged, Soo-hyun listened and then accelerated his car toward him. Man-suk's eyes widened in fear, but at the last second Soo-hyun swerved away. He knew that Man-suk still had many children imprisoned, and he chose to save them first rather than take revenge. Meanwhile, Hyun-jin returned to the site of her attack with her colleague to search for clues about the secretary's whereabouts. However, 2 days had already passed and the evidence had been removed. When she saw the secretary's blood-stained bracelet, she understood what had happened. At the same time, Soo-hyun realized that this was his final battle as an assassin and that his opponent was his own father. Philip informed him that the equipment used to produce the children was located in a hospital. That same day, Soo-hyun disguised himself as a doctor and entered the hospital. In one room, he saw an elderly man lying on a bed. Years earlier, the man had received a heart transplant using his own child's heart and survived. Soo-hyun approached him and asked how it felt to live with his child's heart. Realizing the situation, the man reached for the emergency call button. Soo-hyun did not stop him. He even pressed it for him, then left the room. As doctors rushed in, Soo-hyun used the opportunity to reach the top floor where he found the laboratory. Inside were countless male and female reproductive cells, meticulously organized. This was where the children were created. Soo-hyun immediately called Man-suk and demanded to know where the children were being held. Man-suk refused to answer and mocked him, saying that no one would believe a criminal like Soo-hyun even if he exposed everything. Hearing this, Soo-hyun activated the bomb he had prepared and vowed to make him pay for all his crimes before leaving the room. Minutes later, a massive explosion shook the building. Man-suk realized that the machine he had built his life around had been destroyed. Elsewhere, Soo-hyun intercepted a coded conversation between Man-suk's men and deciphered it, leading him to another location. The room was filled with surgical equipment. Certain he was in the right place, he interrogated the people there, forcing them to reveal where the children were. More of Man-suk's guards rushed in, but Soo-hyun defeated them all with astonishing speed. Searching the house, he heard children crying from one room, broke down the door and rushed inside. Seeing the abused children numbered just like he once was, sitting on the floor filled him with grief and rage, reminding him of his own childhood. At the same time, Hyun-jin went to the clinic looking for Soo-hyun but could not find him. As she was leaving, she accidentally pressed a button and a hidden room opened. Inside were numerous weapons, both light and heavy. Everything she had feared was true. Soo-hyun was the masked man who had saved her that day, the sniper who had assassinated the official, and the man the police had been chasing for years. Driven by anger and desperation, she traced Soo-hyun's car and found it filled with children he had rescued. Realizing this, she called him repeatedly, asking if it was really him. He did not answer. He only told Sol-ji to stay by her side and keep her safe. Jin pleaded with him, saying that killing would not change anything. But Soo-hyun told her that killing Man-suk was the only way to ensure no other child would suffer as he had. He then ended the call. For several minutes, with tears in his eyes, Soo-hyun thought of all the moments they had shared. She had been the only light in his dark life. Now that his identity as a killer was exposed and the police were after him, he knew he could never be with her. Philip urged him to escape with him to Russia, warning that if he continued, he would either be captured or killed. Soo-hyun refused to listen. The next day, Hyun-jin rushed ahead as fast as she could. She obtained a warrant, arrested Man-suk, and brought him to the police station. She felt a slight sense of relief, unaware of just how dangerous Soo-hyun truly was. One day after Man-suk was imprisoned, he used his powerful connections to secure his release. Soo-hyun had expected this. After saying a final goodbye to Sol-ji, Soo-hyun headed toward his last mission. Man-suk, knowing what was coming, gathered all his guards in the room, but his anxiety only grew. He watched as his guards fell one by one. Although Soo-hyun managed to eliminate most of them, he was struck by a bullet. At that critical moment, Philip arrived and shielded him, taking the remaining bullets. Watching his only friend die before his eyes drove Soo-hyun into madness. Ignoring his own wounds, he finished off the rest and finally confronted Man-suk. He tortured him mercilessly, shooting and breaking his limbs. Man-suk begged for mercy like a child. Soo-hyun asked him how someone who clung so desperately to life could be so cruel to newborn children. Man-suk smiled coldly and replied that the children had never been created to live in the first place. Soo-hyun lost the last of his restraint and prepared to fire the final shot. But Hyun-jin burst in and begged him to stop. He told her that even if he stopped now, Man-suk would continue his crimes and the law would never stop him. At that moment, heavily armed federal agents stormed the room. Man-suk tried to escape again. Knowing exactly what he had to do to save the children once and for all, Soo-hyun shot Man-suk in the head. The agents immediately opened fire. Jin watched in devastation as Soo-hyun was shot and fell before her eyes. Holding hands and remembering everything they had shared, Soo-hyun's life came to an end in a tragic and heartbreaking way.